A 5-year-old boy broke away from his father's grip to chase a fallen balloon at the parade. But when he tugged on the coat of the lonely woman standing alone behind the VIP rope, he didn't know she was the richest person in the city, or that her eyes would soften for the first time in years. She looked down, smiled, and in that moment, a single dad's entire world began to shift. The morning started before the sun came up, as it always did for Evan Carter. The kettle rattled softly on the stove, while Liam slept curled beneath a superhero blanket in the next room, one sock off, the other halfway down his foot. Evan moved quietly, careful not to wake him just yet. He took his coffee black, not because he liked it that way, but because milk was for cereal, and sugar was a luxury best saved for Liam's favorite oatmeal. The apartment was small and drafty, with corners that creaked when the heat kicked in, but it was theirs. Evan kept it clean, neat as a pin, even if the carpet had stains he couldn't scrub out. On the fridge, held up by a magnet shaped like a smiley face, was a picture Liam had drawn just, the two of them holding hands in front of a house with a crooked roof and a tree with purple apples. Evan stared at it for a moment while tying his worn work boots. His first shift at the warehouse started at 6. He'd be back just long enough to fix Liam lunch and drop him at the sitter before heading to the evening janitorial job downtown. Sometimes the schedules overlapped, and that meant favors or apologies, usually both. People said kids were resilient, but Evan hated testing that theory. At 5:30, he nudged Liam gently awake. The boy blinked up at him, groggy, smiling when Evan pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Today's the parade, remember?" Evan whispered, already helping him with his clothes. Liam perked up fast, asking a dozen questions before his feet even hit the floor. What kind of floats would be there? Would there be candy? Would the soldiers have horses? Evan didn't have all the answers, but he promised they'd go after his first shift. It was rare to get a day where he could take Liam somewhere fun. He'd traded a Saturday shift for this, something his manager hadn't liked but ultimately allowed. By the time they made it out the door, Evan was balancing a thermos, Liam's little backpack, and a racing mind full of numbers. Rent was due in 4 days. Groceries were low. The car was making that noise again. He tried to push it all down for Liam's sake. As they walked past boarded-up storefronts and flickering street lamps, Liam skipped beside him, holding his hand, eyes wide with excitement. Evan glanced down and managed a tired smile. For all the weight he carried, Liam's joy was his anchor. They might not have much, but in that moment, walking side by side towards something bright and loud and full of wonder, it felt like enough. Madeline Shaw watched the preparations from behind the tall glass of her penthouse suite. Below, the streets buzzed with workers setting up barricades, arranging flags, and checking cables for the stage. The city's annual Veterans Parade was one of the largest in the state, and her company's logo sat squarely on the banners stretched between lampposts. Shaw Technologies had sponsored the event for the past 3 years. It was good PR, her advisors said, but that wasn't why she did it. She sipped from a crystal glass filled with mineral water and let her eyes drift across the crowd gathering below. There was something in the way people moved together on days like this. Families holding hands, kids wearing face paint, old veterans in polished shoes and jackets, heavy with medals. It stirred something she wasn't used to feeling. A knock at the door pulled her attention back. Her assistant, Claire, stepped in, tablet in hand, voice clipped with practiced efficiency. The interviews were lined up. The press would be downstairs in an hour. The mayor wanted to stop by and shake her hand before the stage ceremony. Madeline nodded at it all, already feeling the weight of conversation pulling her back into the polished routine. Later, behind a velvet rope set up for dignitaries and donors, she stood alone. Men in tailored suits made small talk nearby. Women in silk coats laughed behind large sunglasses. Madeline smiled when expected, but her mind wandered. She found herself watching the crowd again, this time not from above but from just a few feet away. Children on tiptoes waved tiny flags. A father hoisted his daughter onto his shoulders, her face beaming as a marching band passed. Madeline remembered her sister on days like this, the way she used to laugh without restraint, the way she always cried when the flag passed by, hand pressed tightly to her heart. It had been nearly 6 years since she died, and still that loss hung inside Madeline like a room she couldn't bring herself to enter. Someone nearby laughed too loudly. Madeline turned her face away. She could write a check for any cause, build hospitals, fund scholarships, yet none of it filled the hollow places. Wealth opened every door, but none that led back to the things that mattered most. As the drums picked up in the distance, and the first float turned the corner onto the avenue, she looked out with something close to hope, not knowing that a boy she'd never met was about to change everything. The parade had already begun when Evan and Liam arrived, weaving through the crowd to find a decent view. Evan hoisted Liam up onto his shoulders so the boy could see above the sea of waving flags and bouncing balloons. The energy on the street was electric, with brass bands blaring from floats and children cheering as candy was tossed from costumed performers. Liam clapped his small hands, eyes shining with excitement. Evan, tired from his shift but determined to make this moment special, couldn't help but smile at his son's joy. He'd forgotten how good it felt to just be present, without a clock ticking in his head. For a moment, it was just the two of them, swallowed by color and sound. Liam spotted a balloon floating high, shaped like a giant cartoon soldier. He gasped and reached toward it, laughing, and in that movement, the balloon he'd been holding slipped from his fingers. It twisted in the wind, lifting higher and higher. Before Evan could react, Liam wriggled down and darted into the street after it. "Liam!" Evan called, shoving past people as he rushed forward. The balloon danced its way through the legs of parade-goers and past the velvet rope meant to separate the crowd from the viewing area for special guests. Liam ducked beneath it without a thought, chasing after the yellow string as it scraped the pavement and lifted again. A pair of polished heels stopped him. He looked up, clutching the balloon string now caught on a shoe. Madeline Shaw stared down at the boy, startled, then knelt without hesitation. "Hello there," she said gently. "Is this yours?" Liam blinked at her, then nodded. "It got away, but I caught it again." Behind him, Evan arrived, breathless and wide-eyed. He scooped Liam into his arms, brushing dirt from his jeans. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice low and apologetic. "He didn't mean to." Madeline raised a hand slightly, smiling. "It's all right. No harm done." Evan froze. He recognized her. Not just from the news or magazine covers, but from city headlines and company logos. This was Madeline Shaw. He stood awkwardly, trying to manage Liam while figuring out what to say next. Liam, completely unfazed, looked up at her. "You have shiny shoes. Are you in the parade?" Madeline chuckled softly. "No, I'm just watching today." "Me too," he said proudly. "My dad said we could come because he didn't have to work all day." Madeline looked at Evan again, something kind and quiet in her expression. "You picked a perfect spot." Evan shifted, unsure if they were being dismissed or invited to linger. Before he could move, Madeline gestured to the open seats beside her, usually reserved for guests and dignitaries. "You're welcome to stay here, if you'd like." Evan hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." As he sat beside the billionaire and borrowed folding chairs, he wondered what kind of world he'd just stepped into, and why it suddenly felt less heavy than it had that morning. Liam sat between them, feet swinging above the pavement, holding his newly rescued balloon with both hands like it was treasure. Madeline watched him out of the corner of her eye, her lips curled in a faint smile. He'd asked her a dozen questions already: what kind of car she drove, if she had a dog, whether she liked chocolate milk. She answered each one with more honesty than she had given anyone in months. Evan mostly stayed quiet, his posture guarded. He glanced at her when she laughed, trying to read her intentions. Madeline was used to people looking at her that way, weighing what they wanted or feared. But Evan's eyes held something different. He wasn't trying to impress her or push her away. He was just trying to make sure his son was safe. That mattered more than anything else. A float passed, shaped like a giant eagle, and Liam gasped, standing on the tips of his sneakers to get a better look. Madeline steadied him instinctively, her hand on his back. Evan noticed, but said nothing. "Your son's curious," she said after a moment. "It's refreshing." "He's got more questions than I have answers," Evan said. "Keeps me on my toes." "I like that." The conversation could have ended there, but Madeline reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small card. It wasn't flashy, just her name and a phone number embossed on thick cream paper. She held it out to him. "If Liam ever wants to visit Shaw Technologies, let me know. We've got a robotics wing with child-friendly exhibits. It's not open to the public, but I could arrange something." Evan took the card slowly, unsure. "That's very generous, but you don't have to." "I know," she said. "I want to." Liam tugged on his dad's sleeve. "Can we go? I want to see the robots." Evan hesitated, then smiled down at him. "We'll see." By the time the parade ended, the sun had started to slip behind the buildings, and the streetlights flickered on. Madeline stood and brushed off her coat. "It was nice meeting you both." "You too," Evan said. She looked at Liam. "Keep asking good questions." Liam gave her a toothy grin and a wave. "Bye, Miss Madeline." Evan watched her walk away, heels clicking on the sidewalk, her figure blending into the crowd until she disappeared completely. He looked down at the card, still in his hand, not knowing why it felt heavier than it should. Evan kept the card in his wallet for nearly a week. It sat behind his bus pass, and the photo of Liam with cake smeared across his face on his 3rd birthday. He didn't tell anyone about it, not even the sitter who watched Liam during his night shifts. Something about it felt private, like holding on to the memory of a strange and gentle afternoon that might disappear if he said it out loud. Liam, however, didn't forget. Every day after school, he asked about the robots. At breakfast, he brought it up again, listing the machines he hoped to see. Flying ones, building ones, even one that could make sandwiches. Evan made excuses. He didn't want to seem like he was chasing after something that wasn't real. People like Madeline Shaw didn't hand out invitations because they meant them. They did it to be polite, or because it looked good in public. He told himself that over and over. Still, on a quiet Wednesday morning, with Liam's backpack zipped and ready, Evan found himself staring at the card again. He turned it over once, twice, then picked up his phone. He didn't think she'd answer. When she did, her voice was calm and familiar, like they had spoken just yesterday. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. Evan cleared his throat. "I wasn't sure you meant it." "I did." "How about Friday?" So they went. Shaw Technologies looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Tall glass panels stretched across the entrance, and the security guard at the front smiled when he saw Madeline waiting for them just inside. She wore jeans and a blazer, casual but confident, nothing like the woman at the parade. Liam ran to her without hesitation, holding up the toy robot she had mailed him the day before. She gave them a private tour, skipping the formalities and showing them the parts of the building few visitors ever saw. Liam touched everything. He asked questions faster than Evan could stop him, and Madeline answered everyone. Evan watched them interact, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. She didn't talk down to Liam or brush him off. She listened, really listened, the way Evan always tried to. They sat in the robotics lab while a small machine handed out juice boxes. Liam squealed with delight. "He's a bright kid," Madeline said, watching him. "Too smart for me some days." Madeline turned to Evan. "And you? What did you dream of before life got complicated?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at his son, laughing with a robot. Then he looked back at her. "Maybe this," he said. "Maybe something like this." She didn't smile, not exactly, but her eyes softened, and the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt like something beginning. The afternoon light poured through the windows of the quiet conference room where Madeline had brought them to rest. Liam sat at a small table with coloring pages and markers, humming to himself as he filled in a picture of a robot holding hands with a boy. Across the room, Evan leaned against the edge of a couch, holding a paper cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Madeline sat nearby, legs crossed, her gaze settled on the city beyond the glass. Neither of them spoke at first. The hum of distant equipment and Liam's soft voice were the only sounds between them. "He likes you," Evan said eventually. Madeline looked over. "I like him too. I can count the number of people who've taken the time to really see him on one hand. His mom would have liked that about you." He hadn't meant to bring her up, not like that. But the words were out. He stared into the coffee, wondering if he should say more or let it drop. Madeline didn't flinch. She gave him the space to decide. She died during a routine surgery. One of those risks they say only happens 1 in 1,000. I guess we were the one. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Evan nodded. "It's been 3 years. I still wait for her to walk through the door some days." Madeline looked down at her hands, fingers resting in her lap. "My sister overdosed on pain medication. She was supposed to be at a family dinner that night. I found out through a phone call from her roommate. There wasn't a note, just a missed call I never returned." Evan looked at her, surprised. "You don't talk about that often, do you?" "No. It doesn't fit the version of me most people are comfortable with." They sat with that for a moment, the air between them no longer distant. Evan glanced toward Liam, who was now carefully outlining stars around the robot's head. "He's the only reason I get out of bed most days," Evan said. Madeline followed his gaze. "Sometimes the people we care for the most are the ones who save us without even knowing." Evan met her eyes again. He didn't smile, but something shifted. Whatever had kept them guarded had begun to loosen. For the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone in the room. The invitation arrived in a white envelope, slipped into Evan's mailbox, addressed in handwriting that looked too elegant for his rusty mailbox. Inside was a simple card, printed with gold lettering, inviting him and Liam to a gala event hosted by Shaw Technologies in support of veterans' mental health programs. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. "I'd like you to come. Both of you. No pressure, just presence. Madeline." Evan stared at it for a long time. He didn't own a suit. Liam didn't have dress shoes, but something in her words made it hard to say no. On the night of the gala, Evan stood in front of the bathroom mirror in a rented blazer and tie that felt too stiff against his throat. He had combed Liam's hair 3 times before finally giving up on the stubborn cowlick. Liam looked up at him in his small button-down and clip-on tie, beaming. "Are there going to be robots?" he asked. "I think this one's more grown-up," Evan replied. "But maybe there will be snacks." The event was held in a glass-walled hall on the 30th floor of a downtown tower. The view stretched over the city, glittering like a field of stars. Evan held Liam's hand tighter than usual as they entered. Servers in black vests offered trays of hors d'oeuvres he couldn't name. Music played softly from a string quartet in the corner. Madeline stood near the center of the room, talking with a group of sharply dressed guests. When she spotted them, her whole expression changed. She excused herself and crossed the room, smiling as she knelt beside Liam. "You clean up well," she said. "So do you," Liam replied proudly, before darting off toward a table with sparkling cider and cookies. Madeline rose to meet Evan's eyes. "I'm glad you came. I'm not exactly comfortable at these things," he said. "I'm not either," she admitted. They moved through the room together. She introduced him to a few people, including a general who asked about Evan's service record, only to learn he hadn't served. A woman nearby made a remark under her breath about charity cases and appearances. Madeline turned toward her, eyes sharp. "He's here because I asked him to be, and I never ask lightly." The woman backed off, embarrassed. Later, as the music changed, Madeline offered her hand. Evan hesitated, then took it. They danced slowly, quietly. Neither said much. It wasn't graceful, but it was honest. Just as the song began to swell, Liam tugged on Evan's jacket. "I'm tired," he said, rubbing his eyes. Evan lifted him into his arms, turning to Madeline. "I think that's our cue." She nodded, but her eyes lingered. As they walked away, Evan glanced back. Madeline stood alone again, but this time she didn't look lonely. She looked like someone waiting for something worth returning to. The night after the gala, Evan lay awake longer than usual. Liam had fallen asleep almost immediately, curled against his side with the faint scent of cookies still clinging to his hair. The room was quiet, but Evan's mind kept circling back to that moment on the dance floor, to the way Madeline had looked at him, to the softness in her voice when she asked if he was all right. It should have felt like progress, like the start of something rare and good, but instead, a weight settled on his chest. He'd grown used to keeping people at a distance, especially those whose lives looked nothing like his own. It was easier than risking the disappointment of finding out they only meant to visit, not stay. He thought of the woman at the gala, her words like a stone in his stomach. Charity case. It echoed louder than it should have. Maybe it wasn't what Madeline thought, but he couldn't shake the fear that she saw him as a story, a contrast to her polished world. That he and Liam were just a moment of warmth in a cold, gilded routine she would one day forget. So he didn't call. Not the next day, not the one after. Madeline sent a short message thanking him for coming. He replied with a polite line or two and let it sit. The silence stretched longer. Madeline stared at her phone more than she wanted to admit. She told herself she was being foolish, that if he didn't want to reach out again, she should respect that. But it hurt more than she expected. He had looked at her like she was something other than a name on a building. And, for a moment, she had believed he saw her. Not her wealth or her history, just her. Days passed without a word, and then one evening, a small envelope appeared in Madeline's mailbox. Inside was a folded piece of construction paper, drawn in Liam's careful hand. A robot with stick arms held hands with 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one short, all smiling. At the top, he had written, "Me, Dad, and Miss Madeline." She held the drawing in both hands and stared at it for a long time. No signature, no message, but the message was clear enough. Some bridges don't burn. They just wait for the right steps to cross them again. The apartment door opened just after sunset. Evan didn't expect to see her standing there. Madeline looked out of place in the dim hallway, her coat folded neatly over one arm, her hair pulled back in a way that seemed softer than usual. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her eyes searched his face, not for approval, but for honesty. He stepped aside without a word, and she walked in slowly. The place was quiet. Liam had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket half tucked around him, his drawing pad still open on the floor. Madeline glanced at the sketch he had started, another picture of the 3 of them in some imagined setting this time, a park with a kite in the sky. Evan closed the door behind her. He stood by the small kitchen table, arms crossed, not angry, but guarded. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I didn't think I would either," she replied. They stood in silence for a few moments, the kind that settles not from discomfort, but from the weight of things unspoken. "I saw the drawing," she said. "It was the only message I needed." Evan looked toward his son. "He's the only thing that's ever made sense to me. I get up for him. I fight for him. I was scared that letting you in would mean I wasn't doing enough." Madeline stepped forward. "Being afraid doesn't make you weak. It means you care what happens next." He met her gaze then. For the first time in days, the tension in his shoulders eased. He reached toward a small box sitting on the shelf near the door. From it, he pulled a slim velvet case and opened it to reveal a simple bracelet. Inside was an engraving, "Chosen, not chance." "I had it made after the gala. I didn't know if I'd ever give it to you," he said. She took the bracelet, turned it over slowly in her hand, then looked back at him. "I'm here because I want to be," she said. Evan stepped closer. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. When he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was steady and real, like the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both had hoped for in quiet moments. Outside, the street was still. Inside, the quiet carried a different weight, one filled with promise. The park was quiet in the early morning light, just the way Evan liked it. He adjusted the folding table one last time while Liam ran in wide circles across the grass, trailing streamers from each hand. The balloons bobbed in place, anchored by gift bags, and a paper banner flapped softly in the breeze. It wasn't a big party, but it was enough. Madeline arrived, carrying a cake box in one arm and a kite in the other. She wore jeans and a faded sweatshirt, her hair tucked under a ball cap. Evan smiled as she approached. "You brought a kite?" he asked. "It's tradition now," she said. Liam spotted her and ran over, arms wide. She bent down to meet him in a hug that nearly toppled the cake. Evan caught it just in time, laughing. They spent the afternoon playing games and telling stories, while a few neighbors stopped by to offer birthday wishes. Madeline helped Liam tie the kite string and guided him through the first few launches until he got the hang of it. Evan watched them from the picnic bench, his heart full in a way that surprised him. Later, after the cake had been eaten and the last balloon drifted off with a final cheer, Madeline reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "I got him something," she said, handing it over. Inside was a toy robot, painted with Liam's favorite colors, but it was more than just a gift. On its back, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "Built with love." Liam clutched it to his chest and ran off to show his friends. Madeline stood beside Evan now, watching the boy sprint back and forth through the grass. "He's lucky to have you," she said. "I'm lucky to have him," he replied. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the bracelet he had given her weeks ago. She wore it now, the engraved words catching the sunlight. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere again," she said softly. "Then I met a boy with too many questions and a father who never stopped trying." Evan turned toward her, then reached for her hand. "You don't have to belong to a place," he said. "Sometimes you belong to people." Liam ran toward them again, laughing, arms outstretched. Evan and Madeline stepped forward together, each reaching for a hand. The three of them walked on, the wind at their backs, and for the first time, no one felt like they were missing anything.